There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I am your host, Richard Shoff. The program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here by the grace of God. I want to start today's program a little bit different than normal. I want to talk to you about something I saw on, I think it was Fox News, about the only one I want to watch. And then I got an article on it covered by the Washington Post. There was an American missionary recently killed on a remote Indian Ocean tribe island. The man's name, John Allen Chau, went to this remote Indian island, North Sentinel Island. He went in there, hired some fishermen to take him in, and then went back on his own in a kayak to this remote island populated by a tribe known for shooting at outsiders with bows and arrows. He's been killed. An official said they were working with anthropologists to try to recover the body. The night before John Chau returned for the last time to India's remote North Sentinel Island, he struggled with a sense of fear that his death might be imminent. "I'm scared," wrote the 26-year-old American. He's from Washington State. He traveled to the island on a clandestine mission to convert its inhabitants to Christianity. A quote, he said, "Watching the sunset, and it's beautiful. Crying a bit. Wondering if it'll be the last sunset I see." End quote. His initial contacts with the Sentinelese, that's a tiny tribe of hunter-gatherers. They reject completely the outside world. And his first contact had not gone well. One teenager had shot at him with an arrow. One shot at him and pierced his waterproof Bible. Yet Chau decided to return to the island and try again. He was galvanized by the feeling that he was God's instrument. "Lord, is this island Satan's last stronghold, where none have heard or even had the chance to hear your name?" Chau wrote that in his diary. Wrote it in the last days, according to the Washington Post, gave it to his mother. He left the 13 pages written in pen and pencil with the fisherman who transported him to the island. In the morning after Chau's final trip to the island shores, the fisherman saw his body being dragged and buried in the sand. Police in the city of Port Blair, the capital of the India's Andaman and Nicobar Islands, this week sent a helicopter and a team of officers by boat to access whether it's possible to recover the body. U.S. diplomats are also in Port Blair to lend assistance. Chau's diary reveals a portrait of a young man obsessed with the idea of bringing Christianity to the Sentinelese. There's only a few dozen of them that live in this largely remote area without contact from the outside world. This has gone on for centuries, back to the Stone Age, I claim. And they're protected by the Indian law and the Indian government. It also shows that Chau knew his mission was illegal. He wrote of maneuvering to avoid the Indian authorities who patrol the waters near the North Sentinel Island. "God himself was hiding us from the Coast Guard in many patrols." A quote from Chau. He said that in a description of the boat journey. He told no one about his plan to hire local fishermen to take him to the tribal area because he didn't want to put others of his friends at risks. That's a quote from Bobby Parks, one of his associates. Bobby Parks wrote it to the mother after the death of her son. This according to an email she shared with the Washington Post. Chau's faithful expedition has caused widespread outrage in the Hindu-majority India, where Christian evangelism and evangelists are often viewed with anger or suspicion. Critics say his brazen violation of Indian law was selfish and put the tribe at risk, particularly exposing them to modern diseases that they have no immunity for. Chau was an avid traveler who graduated from Oral Roberts University. He'd visited the Andaman and Nicobar Islands 4 times before and was awed by the area's natural beauty and isolation. On the boat trip to North Sentinel Island, traveling at night to avoid detection by authorities, and then he paddled in a kayak to the island. He tried to engage the inhabitants by offering gifts of fish and scissors and safety pins. He was singing in their native song as best he understood it. He'd studied their songs, their worship songs. A section of his diary is devoted to his impressions of their language, where he jotted down details of the language, lots of high-pitched sounds and gestures. Toward the end of the journey, Chau wondered whether he should abandon his quest or return to the island and risk the consequences. A quote that he wrote, "I think I could be more useful alive, but to you, God, I will give all the glory of whatever happens." He asked God to forgive any people on this island who try to kill me, and especially if they do. End quote. What dedication. I'm talking about this because I recognize that we're supposed to be discerners of the Spirit, and I'm very careful if I say the Lord told me something personally. Don't have that relationship where we communicate on a regular basis, you know. But he has done things to me. He's given me signs. He's spoken to me at times in my life. But I also recognize that we've got to be a discerner of the spirits, because sometimes the evil one will try to deceive us. But I was particularly impressed with Chau because, well, I knew of Oral Roberts University as I've known it most of my life. A good school. A great school in the field of medicine when Oral Roberts was alive, if it's not now. I don't think we've heard the last on this issue. If it was of God, and I think it was personally, just my own personal thought, I think Chau heard from the Lord, and the Lord told him to go. And I don't think this is the last that we're going to hear on this. I'm going to listen for it and watch for it, and I'm sure going to give it to you if I see it. And if you see anything on it, send it to me at Lincoln Logs in Kannapolis, North Carolina. Chau, in my opinion, followed the will of the Lord, his direction perhaps, gave his life that others might hear. Now to our national scene and our regular program. A current situation, current problems, and we've got a lot of them, folks, haven't we? The Democratic Party has been taken over by lunatics. That's a statement from a former advisor to President Donald Trump last Sunday. Sebastian Gorka pointed it out. Speaking to the Cats Roundtable radio show on AM 970 Radio New York, Gorka said 2 decades ago former President Bill Clinton would at least rein in the loonies in his party. But today the lunatics are taking over the asylum. And you understand that the Democrat Party's been taken over by the radicals. For example, Gorka said Senator Kamala Harris has compared the Department of Homeland Security and ICE to the KKK, and that newly elected Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is publicly calling for a socialistic revolution. He insisted the situation has become so bad that, quote, today a hardcore pro-nationalist security politician like John F. Kennedy would not be allowed in the Democrat Party, end quote. Gorka said this trend in the Democrat Party was started by former President Barack Obama, who spent 8 years traveling around the world, apologizing for America. Gorka made the comments during a discussion about immigration and the current caravans traveling to Mexico headed toward our southern border. He emphasized that when Democrats encourage illegal migration, the people who get hurt most are the recent legal immigrants in the U.S., generally at the bottom of the wage earning scale. Those that did it the right way, taking many times years. An example of our Democrats' extremism, I see where the House Democrats now want to relax a 181-year-old ban on hats that'll allow religious headwear. You know, like a high bob or whatever they're going to allow it on the floor of the House of Representatives. The change was proposed jointly by Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, incoming Rules Chairman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, and member-elect Omar of Minnesota. Omar tweeted, "No one puts a scarf on my head but me. It's my choice, one protected by the First Amendment." Well, who's Omar? Omar will be the first Somali American in Congress and the first woman of color to represent her state in Washington when the new Congress convenes in January. She'll be joined by fellow Midwestern Democrat Michigan's Rashehab Tlaib. And guess what, folks? They're the first two Muslim women in Congress. Yep, in our Congress. Yeah, the American Congress, the House of Representatives in Congress. And now hats of any kind have been banned from the floor since 1837, but now the Democrats say they'll add an exception for religious headwear under a new package of rule changes. Democrats know that our strength lies in our diversity, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion. A quote from Nancy Pelosi. You know, she's going to head up this new Congress in January. She said, and I continue to quote her, "After voters elected the most diverse Congress in history, clarifying the antiquated rule banning headwear will further show the remarkable progress we've made as a nation." End quote. Added McGovern, this change will finally codify that no restriction may be placed on a member's ability to do the job that they were elected to do simply because of their faith. And isn't it strange, folks? That faith is Islam. These two are Muslims. The American people just elected the most diverse Congress in history, and our rules should embody that, McGovern reported to NBC News. And listeners, I think we haven't seen anything yet. I think that that's probably an understatement. We're in troubled times. And meanwhile, let's look at our southern border. Again, quoting Sebastian Gorka, he noted that the Ninth Circus Court doesn't run immigration or security. The wave of new immigrants arriving at the U.S. border poses a national security problem, and President Donald Trump has the right to fight it, just as he fought and won his battle for a travel ban. This, a quote from Sebastian Gorka, a former deputy assistant to our president, and now a senior national security strategist for Fox News. He said, and I continue to quote him, "For those liberals who say we have an individual in the White House with dictatorial propensities, it's absolutely the opposite. We went through the whole court system, through the appeal system, right up to the Supreme Court to get rulings decided that he's doing it the legal way. In the end, the courts ruled Trump gets the final decision. In the United States, one gets to decide on who comes in to the nation and whether they're a threat to national security, and it's not the legislature," Gorka said. He continued, and I'm quoting, "It's not the court, and it's definitely not somebody in San Francisco who belongs to the Ninth Circus Court." Trump slammed the court recently located in the Northern District of California. That's where they issued a temporary order blocking his order barring migrants who come into the United States illegally from seeking asylum. The court has issued several other rulings blocking Trump's orders since he took office. Also, he said many of those trying to come into the United States do not even qualify for asylum. Asylum is if you are being persecuted for political reasons or for other reasons, Gorka said, not if you want a job. That's very, very clear. And you know what's happened now? If you've been following the news, you see where the Chief Justice came out and criticized the president for referring to an Obama judge. He said, our Chief Justice Roberts, he said, we don't have Obama judges or Clinton judges or Bush judges or Trump judges. He said that they're all serving together. Openly, he criticized the president. The rebuke to President Trump issued by Justice John Roberts over criticism of an Obama judge was wrong in two ways. Of course, the New York Times gleefully reported on the scolding from Roberts, the head of our federal judiciary. We do not have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. That's what our Supreme Court head said. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them. That independent judiciary is something we should all be thankful for. A quote from John Roberts. As Mark Levine posted on Facebook, and I'm quoting Levine, it appears John Roberts doesn't live in the real world. A few decades ago, he understood that there are, in fact, too many progressive judges and justices who legislate from the bench. Indeed, when it came to Obamacare, Roberts himself led the court leftists in rewriting the Constitution and imposing that damnable law on all of us. We don't need any lectures from him, pointed out Levine. Indeed, he should be admonishing his own branch of government for its outrageous activism, rather than playing to the media by attacking the president. It was classless, he noted. Roberts has remained silent as a series of outrageous decisions from federal district judges have substituted a single judge's decision on what the President of the United States should do for the authority granted to him by the chief executive by the Constitution. President Obama, of course, fired back, as he characteristically does. You don't fire on him without hearing back. For at least 6 decades, courts have been legislating from the bench, and finally a president has taken him on. We can expect the entire institutional weight of the establishment to come down hard on him. The only thing Trump has going for his position is reality. Interesting, huh? And let's look down at that border. What's happening down there on the border? Well, over Thanksgiving, Trump has threatened to close the U.S.-Mexico border. If necessary, close it completely. He warned just this past Thursday there could be a government shutdown next month over security on the border with Mexico, suggesting that he could hold up negotiations if no more money is provided for a wall between the two countries. Could there be a shutdown? There certainly could be. That's what Trump says. And it'll be about border security, of which the wall is a part. He told this to reporters this past week down in Palm Beach. Trump also said that he'd given the military the authorization to use lethal force if necessary on the border with Mexico. If they have to, they're going to use lethal force. I've given the okay. I hope they don't have to. A quote from our president. Trump also warned that the United States would close the whole border with Mexico for a period of time if we find that it gets to the level where we are going to lose control or our people are going to start getting hurt. Again, a quote from Donald Trump. Ahead of U.S. congressional elections earlier this month, Trump denounced the approach of a caravan of immigrants as an invasion that threatened American national security, and he sent thousands of U.S. troops to the border to help secure it. U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis said just this last Wednesday that he'd been granted authority to allow troops on the Mexican border greater powers to help protect border officials and would await directions from the Department of Homeland Security. Mattis said the troops could help protect the border agents with shields and batons, but that they would not be armed. 2 U.S. officials speaking on the condition of anonymity told Reuters this past week a memo signed by White House Chief of Staff John Kelly gave Mattis the authority to protect immigration agents and, if necessary, could include actions like use of lethal force, crowd control, temporary detention, and searches. Having won control of the House in the elections, Democrats said they're going to be even less motivated than before to meet Trump's wall demands. Trump has issued ultimatums about wall funding before with little impact, even with his own Republican Party in majority control of both the Senate and the House. If the two parties can't reach a funding deal, there could be a partial government shutdown, with so-called essential services, including some of the Department of Homeland Security, likely remaining in operation. And what's happening down on the border? The caravan is trying to breach the wall. And again, our president, I say, has threatened to close the port of entry amid the caravan's rush to gain illegal entrance. The U.S. has temporarily closed several ports of entry with Mexico after officials received reports that the migrant caravan of 3,000 was preparing to bum rush the border. This is a quote from Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. The AM San Ysidro Port of Entry's northbound lanes were temporarily closed to initiate additional port hardening efforts after officials were notified that a large number of caravan migrants were planning to rush the border in an attempt to gain illegal access to the U.S. A quote from Homeland Security Secretary Nielsen. She tweeted it just recently. In response, Customs and Border Patrol Protection issued a statement saying they blocked several port of entry lanes and reinforced their number to head off the invasion, in conjunction with the Department of Defense. In the early morning hours, Customs and Border Patrol, that's CBP officials, received reports of groups of persons from the caravan gathering in the city of Tijuana for a possible attempt or attempts to rush illegally through the port of entry instead of presenting themselves as required to a CBP officer. CBP officials suspended operations to safely place impediments at the port of the entry that would restrict access to a large number attempting to run through the border crossing. After the CBP response at San Ysidro, no activity materialized at the border crossing, the statement said. San Ysidro is known as the border's busiest crossing, with over 100,000 people entering the U.S. daily. About 10 lanes were reopened several hours after the closure. Nielsen reminded the caravan that entering the U.S. by force is illegal and won't be tolerated. Unfortunately, some members of the caravan are purposely causing disruptions at our border ports of entry. There's a legal and illegal way to enter the U.S., she pointed out. We have deployed additional forces to protect our border. We will enforce all of our laws. End quote. And have you seen that video on television? I'm sure many of you have, where they're showing the residents of Tijuana clashing with members of the caravan over the past weekend. They're saying that Donald Trump was right to call it an invasion. They don't want them there. They said that Trump tweeted an updated picture of the reinforced border saying that the fake news had been showing old footage. The fake news is showing old footage of people climbing over our ocean area fence. This is what it really looks like, they pointed out. No climbers. Anyway, they're pointing out that they think that Trump may be right. It's a caravan assault on the city of Tijuana that's causing the residents of Tijuana to be upset right now. Migrants have joined from Central America to this border city seeking refuge from violence from back home, and they've encountered unexpected violence and harassment. More than 3,000 migrants have arrived in Tijuana. That's a rate of arrival that city officials say is without precedent in the history of a city known as, quote, the City of Migrants. The migrants form part of the Central American caravans seeking political asylum in the U.S. The caravan's highly publicized arrival has generated a nationalistic backlash from a segment of residents here that views the migrants as a threat to public safety and as unwanted competition for jobs and public services in Mexico. It's led to a kind of siege mentality inside the emergency shelter where they've taken refuge in Tijuana. The first sign of violence came when a crowd of angry residents from an affluent coastal town part of the city known as Posada de Tijuana confronted the migrants who had gathered there to spend the night at a local park. They'd set up tents in Tijuana. The police did confirm all of this is happening, took pictures, and refused to condone the activities. Protesters decried the migrants as invaders and ingrates. Behind the police line, migrants were restricted from leaving the shelter, dozens of them huddled inside a fence. The more aggressive the protest and harassment, they say, the more tightly police restricted their movement in and out of the shelter. And the city's supply of food and water at the shelter is inadequate to meet the growing need. Public resentment against the migrants has been fueled in part by comment from Tijuana Mayor Jose Manuel Gastelum, who accused migrants in the caravan of being violent and crude. He vowed to conduct an inquiry to decide if the city will continue to welcome them, to permit them to come. He pointed out the city may not have the resources to continue to shelter and support the caravan. President Trump, in a tweet, likened his concerns about the caravan to the president's own. The mayor of Tijuana, Mexico, just stated that the city is ill-prepared to handle this many migrants. The backlog could last 6 months. Likewise, the U.S. is ill-prepared for this invasion and will not stand for it. They are causing crime and big problems in Mexico. Go home, a tweet from President Trump. This is what's happening in our borders, folks. Happening today. Turn on your televisions. You'll see it. Now it gets back to the recent election for a different take on what went on. And this is all part of the problem that we are facing now, today, this weekend, and we're going to be even more aware of with the Democrats in charge of the House when they take over in January. But this points to and asks the question, what's really happening? Could it be that the Democrat voter fraud in 2018 was a trial run to seal the presidency for the globalists in 2020? Democrats proved in 2018 they'll stop at nothing to destroy the rule of law and to destroy America. Voter fraud is nothing new. It goes back to the Kennedy administration. The Democrat machine at the time worked with the unions to give the Democrats an insurmountable lead. Looking at the past elections and chaos throughout our country, has lost the confidence of the American people in election. The start of this loss of confidence was in Florida and has taken up most of the discussion over the past few weeks. Democrat leaders in Florida were caught fixing improper ballots after the deadline had passed. Filing these ballots after the election was illegal. At least it was until Obama-appointed judge ruled that these ballots could be counted, these extra ballots, and this resulted in judicial-sanctioned fraud. This one step could be enough to process charges upon all concerned. The Naples, Florida Daily News reported that Florida Democrats were in the process of starting a broader statewide effort throughout Florida to give altered forms to fix improper ballots. After being warned by a Democrat consultant, Jake Sanders, about the questionability, legality of such a move, the campaign leadership continued unabated, under the impression that an activist judge would allow the process. The modified date on these altered cure affidavits was changed to November 8th. Folks, that's 2 days after the election. The leadership which pushed the process not only under Brenda Snipes in Broward County, but to Pam Keith, a Palm Beach County Democrat activist, to do the same thing there. It had spread to other counties as well. In California, widespread election theft continued unabated without any investigation of false ballot manufacturing, illegal immigration voting, and outright fraud. Once again, the ability to find thousands of ballots after the deadline of the election has passed a strict Democrat ability. It is informative that these found ballots, which have been unearthed by Democrat operatives, are for the sole benefit of progressive socialists running in California. I've got a list here that I don't have time to go through, house by house in Democrat areas where these found ballots, after the final polls had closed, after Republicans had been declared winners, poll after poll said the Republicans had won, but then they found these false ballots. We had the same thing in New Jersey, or in Arizona, where Republican McSally was ahead of Sinema the night of the election by a sizable margin, but because of found ballots, Sinema now has a sizable lead, and she's been declared the winner of the Senate race in Arizona. It happened in New Mexico, where a Republican congressional district Republican had won, but found ballots put the Democrat in. What's happening, folks? Is this all a foreplay of what we can expect in the next presidential election? If you don't win, you cheat, you commit fraud, and if you don't have somebody watching and you can't watch maybe every place all the time, your socialistic progressives take over. The question becomes, why is it that no one is going to jail for the fraud that we see in Florida? No charges are being even talked about, and not even a good investigation in California. What does it tell us is going to happen when the president runs for re-election? When the Senate is up again? Our country is in peril. I ask you again, what can we do? And I tell you we can pray. I believe sincerely that it was God that made it possible for us to have President Donald Trump. I believe that he's protected him thus far. I believe he's protecting right now his personal safety. And Lord, I believe you can guide and direct in the coming election. And I empower God's people to get on their knees as never before and pray for the preservation of our republic. God bless until next week.